Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the Incomprehensible / Unexplainable Iceberg. This is the third, so if you haven't watched the previous 2 parts, I recommend watching those before diving into this video. These are the topics that I've covered so far, and we still have plenty left to cover, so let's get straight into part 3 of the Unexplainable / Incomprehensible Iceberg.
God, that was a good take.
Delving below the waves. The WOW signal. The WOW signal was a radio signal detected on August 15, 1977, by the Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope. The telescope detected a very odd anomaly that was circled and the word WOW was written next to it, and which you are looking at right now that led to the anomaly's name. The signal, which some say is a cleverly encoded message, is actually a variation of a signal's intensity over time, with the WOW signal reaching at its peak in intensity between 30 and 31, which is 30 times the standard detection from background noise the radio telescope was used to picking up. You can see now why people got very excited about this noise. Its space is equivalent of the bloop sound heard in the ocean. But what could it mean, or what is it exactly? It's been extremely hard to replicate for many reasons. The main one being we know roughly what area the signal was heard from, but not exactly, as the Big Ear operated off of 2 different devices, each receiving a deep beam from slightly different directions. And only on one of the devices, the WOW signal was detected, and the way it was detected intermingled the data, so we have 2 different areas in which the signal may have come from. So doubling up on searching in that area, and attempting to try and find where the signal is, has made the process take a bit longer. With all this attention though, they really started honing in on what were in these areas, finding multiple stars and even a few sun-like stars. This of course adds to the likelihood of possible extraterrestrial connection to these areas, but so far, no techno-signature candidates have been observed in this area. Without me researching, I wouldn't know what that means, but it basically means the radio detection has not been replicated pointed at the same spot, or been observable since. This has led many to believe both that the signal was from a far-off extraterrestrial species emitting their own radio waves from some form of vessel, possibly a lighthouse-type sweeping signal, a fluke, or a hydrogen cloud having comets pass through them causing a frequency to be picked up on Earth. There are many different possible explanations, but none that any governing scientific body have been willing to put forward and back, or that we have an explanation for really. But if you happen to have tweeted, by the way, even though it's dying horribly, you can still follow me on Twitter at Gordon Sanafa. Can't get the @Gurdon. A tweet that has the hashtag chasing UFOs in 2012. The Arecibo Observatory beamed a digital stream towards the area that consisted of about 10,000 tweets, as well as videos from celebrities and a repeating header to help any would-be intelligent species know that the message was intentional. So who knows, maybe there's another intelligent life form out there that's just reading some of our tweets. Mystery eruptions. I covered this a little in my last video on the topics of vampires, oddly enough. Please go watch that video. I put a lot of effort into it and I really like the subject matter, and I hope you do if you like this video. But there are eruptions on this Earth that we aren't sure when they happened, or to what degree they happened, but we know that they had an impact on us as people. The more recent major example was one that happened somewhere between 1808 or 1809. A few years after, in 1816 and years around then, the global temperature was oddly low on Earth, with 1816 having the lowest recorded summer temperatures ever between 1766 and 2000, which caused some real issues, especially with food. This was first believed to have been the cause of the volcanic eruption of Mount Tambora in the Dutch East Indies, and very much could have been the cause of it all. But new research into the matter has shown that there were very high sulfate spikes, as well as tree ring data that shows that the eruptions may have taken place earlier than expected, possibly as early as 1808. Another theory is that there was a large amount of these mystery eruptions that took place all over the world, in areas we had no access to or were ever recorded, that might have lowered the global temperature by quite a bit, leading to possibly a little ice age. Some people also believe that the large amount of eruptions might have displaced and shaken up the crust of the Earth so much as to cause and led to the eruption of Tambora in 1815, which led to the year without a summer. This, all while many other volcanoes and eruptions have and had been recorded around the time, but none quite enough to affect the world in the way that it did, as well as in the right areas. Some have speculated that these mystery eruptions took place somewhere in Antarctica, as well as someplace in between Indonesia and Tonga, but no one really has the ability or confirmation as to give a definitive answer, and there may never be. Infinity. Infinity is something endless, or the opposite of nothing, everything but more. You know, it's really hard to describe infinity. You try. And that's kind of why it's on this list, because humans have an extremely hard time understanding what in math are called large numbers. Because while humans are pretty good at counting and doing math, we're not very good at comprehending very large numbers. I can count to 100. I can even probably count to 1,000 or 10,000 give it enough time. But do I really understand how many 10,000 of any given thing is? If I give you $1,000 in ones, it might be a whole bunch of paper to deal with. But if I gave you $1,000 in pennies, the amount of pennies might be more than you or I would ever see in our combined lives. And that's where large numbers start to trip up humans. We've had many centuries, if not millennia, of living in small areas and villages with maybe a couple hundred to 1,000 people. Or more recently, in cities with millions of people. But this is kind of new to humanity, though, as a whole. And there's even a term for this, well, more a number, but you know. It's called Dunbar's number, which is the cognitive limit on the number of people that one can maintain social relationships with. And most people, including you and I, can only keep up with about 150 people before we start having a hard time maintaining or keeping people straight in our heads. But that's only 150. And this part of the iceberg isn't called Dunbar's number, it's called infinity. And while yes, 10,872,003 is a large number, technically we can determine this number exactly and correlate it to something in the real world. The amount of sand in an hourglass or pennies, right? But a number so big that the concept of it is something nobody can ever truly grasp is something special. And yet, there are multiple types of infinities and sizes of infinities even. I want to remind you again, I am not a mathematician. And maybe that's why these math concepts really mess with my head. But they're all wild to me and go simultaneously all the way up and all the way down. The smallest form of infinity is the fact that between any two numbers, there are infinite numbers. Little weird, but it's true. You could find infinite smaller numbers between any two whole numbers all the way to its only smaller infinity. Let me give you an example. If you had a 6-inch ruler and you wanted to add half the length of that ruler to the end of the first one, and then half of that ruler onto that one, you would never ever hit 12 inches. That's what's called an infinite progression. That's just on the smaller side as well. Somehow people out there have found out that while there are technically infinite numbers, not all infinities are made equal. If you have an infinity made out of integers or real numbers, you technically would hit the end at some point. While if you had a form of infinity without integers and assigned integers to them instead, the second form of infinity is larger. Stuff like this is way too big brain for me, so if you want, you can watch this video on the infinite hotel paradox, where much smarter people and better at 3D modeling than I am made a helpful informational video to show just how wild infinity is. But luckily, this section of the video isn't infinite, so we can just move on to cold fusion. Cold fusion, the ability to get more energy out of a nuclear exchange at room temperatures without a nuclear explosion. While this might not sound that crazy on the surface, it only really makes sense on the surface of the sun, that is. The sun has this ability, but it's also able to do this by being about 10 million degrees hotter, and with 100 times the pressure than the deepest points on Earth has to offer. The concept of cold fusion and the ability to compress atoms together to create high amounts of energy has been a decade away, for many decades now. We sadly haven't had much success or even really breakthroughs in this technology, as most of the scientific community isn't even sure that it's a real thing. And that's why I'm here to talk about it. A couple of scientists named Pons and Fleischmann made the original experiment, which was a beaker of heavy water, where each oxygen molecule was bound to 2 deuterium atoms, rather than 2 simple hydrogen atoms. They put a rod of palladium metal into it, and hooked the other end to one side of a battery, while the other terminal was linked to a coil of platinum wrapped around the inner wall of the beaker itself. With this original experiment, Pons and Fleischmann said that in doing this, the experiment produced an amount of heat that shouldn't be possible with the original energy of the battery itself. But the energy had to come from somewhere. The only explanation they could come up with was that the deuterium atoms were fusing and creating energy. There was a major problem though. As soon as these experiments were brought to the public, government agencies frantically got teams together as quickly as they could and attempted to replicate these results, as this would essentially mean creating more energy than spent in terms of nuclear, and could theoretically mean infinite renewable energy. But when multiple agencies attempted to recreate these experiments, they didn't get anything nearly as substantial and wrote off cold fusion as a hoax. They discredited Pons and Fleischmann to the point of calling cold fusion a myth. Everybody, but oddly, the United States Navy Office of Naval Research. They kept funding research going into cold fusion for years, but did it ever amount to anything? And that's where things get weird. Most organizations concluded that no heat or energy, or very sparingly excess flashes of heat, would arise, while others like Melvin Miles went from no heat or excess energy to reporting 30 to 50% more energy than was put in. What did Miles get for this though? He was reprimanded, and the budget for research on cold fusion was cancelled after he had refined the formula for years. Miles became unemployable after reporting this information. His hundreds of peer-reviewed papers ended up meaning nothing, and Miles ended his career as a clerk in a storeroom, taking boxes off of shelves. This is a cautionary tale that only begets more caution. You see, Julian Schwinger was a Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist. Schwinger, who sadly passed away from pancreatic cancer in 1994, spent his final years on Earth studying cold fusion. Schwinger, by the way, was one of the main researchers and scientists that helped nail down the theory of quantum electrodynamics, which, until many years of research by a committed team, was considered an anomaly itself, and what drove Schwinger to delve into the topic in the first place. It was an anomaly, but one that had at least been observed and could be speculated about. But in the end, he ended up spending his last years on a subject that sadly amounted to nothing more than disdain from the scientific community as a whole, with many editors and peers refusing to publish or edit any of his last 8 theory papers. Such an anomaly as cold fusion, whether a fluke or a groundbreaking discovery and breakthrough, should be studied and looked into. And in 2004, there was hope. The Department of Energy in the United States released a study that admitted that maybe there was something to cold fusion after all, long after many of its pioneers had been shamed and even passed away. You see, those government agencies I mentioned before had reached out to leading scientific bodies which did their research, and the top 3 were MIT, Caltech, and the United Kingdom's Hallwell Laboratory. All 3 at the time reported that Pons and Fleischmann's report had no scientific basis. That is, until years later, the chief science writer of MIT at the time reviewed the paper and noticed that they had made an amendment to the paper 3 days before the final report, stating that there had been excess energy and heat. The chief science writer brought up these discrepancies, lodged a formal complaint, and resigned in protest. The damage had already been done though. Those reports, all those years earlier, by all 3 agencies, had been presented to Congress and funding had been pulled. But now, with the Department of Energy admitting that maybe there is something to cold fusion, there's hope that maybe this mystery can finally be solved. In the years since the Department of Energy's admission that maybe there's something to cold fusion after all, reliable, incontestable evidence of nuclear reactions has been reported and shown that there's a future. The Navy has begun funding research into cold fusion again and backing it, but there's a distinct lack of the word fusion in their funding. Just low-energy nuclear reactions, which is a start, but there's still a long way to go until we can finally understand why this happens, if there are ways to use cold fusion to our advantage, or if it's just scraping the surface of nuclear reactions. Until then, we just have to keep our minds open to any theories out there. The Black Stain. The black stain is a mysterious black substance that oozes from the roads in Caracas, Venezuela. Yeah, I read that right. I guess we're getting pretty deep in the iceberg, huh? Anyways, the black stain, or as it's called in Venezuela, La Mancha Negra, is an odd, quote, blob of thick black sludge with the consistency of chewing gum, end quote. First noticed by ground crews that had been sent in to repair the pothole-ridden area. The crews showed up and began the basic repair task of fixing up the roads, when they noticed this odd goo oozing out from the road in an area of only roughly 50 yards. They paid it no mind, as their job was to fix the potholes and repair the roads, not investigate, black mystery fluid that no one has ever really experienced or come in contact with. So they did their job and went on their way. 5 years later, though, the black stain now covered 8 miles of the same road and has caused many accidents and even deaths. The goo is so far only found on a busy road that is the main thoroughfare between the capital city of Venezuela and its main international airport, allowing much traffic to cross and interact with the mystery substance. Locals have described driving on the black stain like, quote, driving in a Grand Prix. You've got to be careful or you'll die. Now this wouldn't be that wild of an unexplained/unknown occurrence if not for the absurd amount of deaths that have been reportedly caused by the black stain. In the first 5 years after it appeared, La Mancha Negra had managed to kill 1,800 people on the 8-mile stretch where it occupies. For comparison, the I-5 in California, which is considered the deadliest road in America, in the 5-year period between 2015 and 2019, only killed 584 people, roughly along the same length of highway. But what is the black stain? That's not only why it's on this iceberg list, but so low. And the answer is still unknown to this day. It sounds straight out of a horror film. Many people say that they will clean the black stain away one day and it'll be back the next. Some say that the black stain is nothing more than a buildup of oil and fluids from old and badly maintained cars that seemingly leaks onto the road and causes buildup with dust. But as locals and people around the world are quick to point out, many other places on Earth have poorly maintained cars and oil slicks, and no other place has reported this black stain. On top of that, this mysterious goo comes and goes as it pleases, one day seeping out from the asphalt and causing mayhem, and the next is nowhere to be seen. It also doesn't seem to follow conventional means of flowing and filling lower gaps on flat open terrain, and instead appears in tunnels and on uphill slopes. There are plenty of conspiracy theories and ways that people have tried to explain away the black stain, but none so far have come close to a definitive answer. The Venezuelan government has paid millions of dollars to research and attempt to figure out what the black stain was and still doesn't know, as the black stain has seemingly disappeared and isn't a problem to the Venezuelan government or people these days. So will we ever know what this botched black stain is? Who knows? Maybe. But until then, it's time to dive one layer deeper to the bottom of this iceberg. Bottom of the iceberg. The birthday effect. The birthday effect is a statistical phenomenon that states that an individual is more likely to die on or close to their birthday. That doesn't mean to be scared or worried about passing away on your birthday, but it does kind of mean to be a little bit more careful with celebrations on or around your birthday to avoid accidents. This is just a note from me. The stats point to that men tend to die on the days leading up to their birthday, and statistically women tend to die on the days shortly after their birthday. There are lots of possible reasons for this, as the effect seems to show up in cultures across North America and Europe, including England, Wales, Switzerland, Ukraine, and the United States, as well as oddly in Major League Baseball players. A large-scale study of 2,745,149 Californians who died between 1969 and 1990 was conducted, in which they corrected for factors like seasonality in deaths, elective surgeries, and those darn people born on February 29th. You know who you are. They concluded that there was a significant increase in deaths around one's birthday. An even larger study of 12,275,033 Swiss deaths found that the highest levels of the birthday effect on the actual birthday, with an increase of 17% chance of death on one's own day of birth. But what's the explanation for this? It has to be just statistical error or something, right? Well, lots of theories have gone into this alleged effect, and explanations range wildly, from misinputs on death certificates to psychological stress around the mortality of one's life around their birthday. But in most studies, these numbers and variables are taken into account. On most birth certificates and death certificates, if the day of birth or death couldn't be ascertained exactly, if both these numbers happen to fall in the same month, that would take into account these oddities. But no. As the birthday effect has been shown to be prevalent in the days before and the days after one's birthday as well, so the dates don't line up. There's also the possible explanation that, like the circadian rhythm, humans have a yearly circannual biological rhythm that resets every year around a birthday. And those conditions cause changes in internal stress and thus increase the chance of death. There's a lot that goes into thoughts about this phenomena. Alcohol can play a large part, as people are more likely to get intoxicated and party on their birthday, which leads to more deaths and therefore unfortunate accidents. But there's a couple deeper theories and thoughts that seem to be where most people end up, but they kind of contradict each other. You see, a birthday is a day to either look back upon one's life and reflect in a positive way about what they would lose in death and try and hold on. And to others, it's a reminder about what has passed, and can be a staunch reminder that the glory days are over. And for those that might be suffering through depression, or even a terminal illness, a birthday is a fixed date for someone to focus on, and allows people to try and hold on until that specific date. In the end, though, we may not know exactly what the cause of this birthday effect is, or if it happens to be a statistical anomaly that will explain itself in the coming years. But it is something to think about, even if it's just for a second. It's a very morbid thought, but this is why it's so deep on the iceberg, and boy, it only gets deeper from here. 96% of the universe. Jeez. Did you know that we as humans can only comprehend 4% of the known universe? The other 96% of reality is dark matter and dark energy. That's what really got me into making this video at a deep level. I haven't mentioned it much, but so many aspects and things for this video have come from the book 13 Things That Don't Make Sense by Michael Brooks. Which, if any of these topics have intrigued you or interested you at all, you should absolutely buy this book, as it was one of the most enjoyable reads I've had in a long time. Check it out, please. That being said, in that book, Brooks goes on to what I'm going to be calling the missing universe, which is the fact that of every single thing in the entire universe, humans can only comprehend 4% of it. To put that into perspective, we as humans have observed almost the entirety of land on Earth, with lower estimates being that we've only observed 78% of land on Earth, and to some sources as high as 98% of land, not including Antarctica, which is pretty high. But in comparison, we've only explored between 5 and 22% of the oceans on our own planet. That equates to us not knowing roughly what 65% of the planet we live on is or looks like. That's a huge percent, but pales in comparison to the fact that 96% of the entirety of everything might actually be unobservable and impossible for humans to even recognize or perceive. It may be a matter of perception, it may be a matter of science and math making it extremely hard to detect it. But how do you plan or even begin to go about detecting something that simultaneously exists and doesn't exist? It's wild, but there are people on this earth whose sole jobs are to try and observe that dark matter and dark energy are even real. Because we know that something is out there, but we just don't know what. Well, with dark matter itself, it's pretty possible that we could detect it in some form, right? Like something has to interact with dark matter. And that's kind of where we are right now. There are scientists and researchers doing extremely elaborate experiments to even prove the existence of this stuff, because without it, so many things in the universe remain undiscovered and confusing. There are laboratories and facilities as deep as 1,100 meters in the UK, and 700 meters in the United States full of materials at temperatures as close as humanly possible to absolute zero, just to hope that one form of dark matter will collide and hit one of these detectors on Earth. And that's just dark matter. Dark energy is the bigger, badder brother of dark matter. You see, while dark matter is a form of matter that does impossible things like possibly holding the entirety of our solar system together, to attracting gravitational force and holding the galaxy in place, dark energy is the opposite. Dark energy is everything that pushes against the folds of time and space, breaking laws, going against all forms of known gravity, and as far as we can tell is just getting bigger and bigger and making the universe as a whole large at a rate that we can't figure out. The universe was proven to not just be expanding still, but the expansion is accelerating. The cosmos are literally blowing themselves apart. From looking at and observing supernova, and even taking into account space dust and the time it takes for energy to get back to us on Earth, the results show that the universe has a negative amount of mass, which makes absolutely no sense, by the way. All things that make up dark matter and dark energy go against what we know to be true and right on Earth, so much that there's a whole other form of theoretical and quantum physics and mechanics, that the rules we've developed for things like gravity on Earth and in our solar system don't seem to work. There's things like quantum entanglement that just goes against every single thing that you could even think of making sense, so much that Einstein, yes, that guy, called it spooky action at a distance. There is so much to space and physics, and I'm all here for it. But when there's an entire 96% of everything that we don't know, it really gets to me. What is it? Have we been thinking of it all wrong and possibly the entirety of everything is wrong? And have we been throwing a god particle or two at the whiteboard and hoping something sticks? I don't know. I'm some person on YouTube that doesn't have anything close to a degree in the sciences. We just have to go and wait. Like so many other things on this list, and probably many other things that I haven't covered, there are things out there that are so hard to even begin to understand and wrap our minds around. To think of theoretical and even galaxy-wide phenomenon in our day and age, what's to come in the future? We could have an answer to dark matter and dark energy and what our entire universe is made up of at the end of the day. It may be something intensely wild and sciencey, or it may be something cosmic and horrifying. And I'm all here for it, and I hope you are too. But before I ramble on any more about cosmic-sized proportions and wild out-there concept like gravity, oh, that's the next topic, okay. Well, let's talk about how gravity is wrong. While not proven, and kind of like how 96% of the universe is unknown, it adds to the air of mystery that things people thought so concrete as fundamental laws can be uprooted and changed just one day. There's a growing group of people on Earth and scientists that believe that the formula and our understanding of gravity is wrong. These scientists believe that Newton's law of gravity is wrong, but can't prove it, as proving it would fundamentally change your understanding of physics and gravity itself, but would possibly allow for the concepts of dark matter and dark energy to be understood or at least quantified. If there is dark matter and dark energy at all. You see, that's why I put these topics right next to each other on this iceberg, as I had no idea, but these are kind of connected. There are of course people out there that say theories and ideas about how gravity is just wrong entirely, but as many memes have let me know, things that go up must come down. And to think that many people, much smarter than I, have had to seriously sit down and come to grips with that fact, and even debate how things come down is quite funny to me. But in reality, there are weirder elements of gravity not making sense, that most respected scientists believe that the formula just needs tweaking, but in doing so that would uproot what it's all built on, Newton's law of gravity. Some of these more recent scientists like Mordechai Milgram, Stacy McGaw, Jacob Bekenstein, and David Rubin have created a whole new model for gravity called MOND, M-O-N-D. that entirely changes the way that gravity is calculated and gets rid of these mysterious particles like dark matter and dark energy in a more straightforward way. But they haven't been given the light of day by modern scientists, as they already have a very well accepted and tested model of gravity with Newton's law, and don't want to change 400 years of gravity and mess with Newton at all, even though he's dead. He really wouldn't mind, I don't think. But that was until Jacob Bekenstein got involved. He made various controversial statements and proposals about black holes back in the day, which turned out to be true, by the way, and decided to take a crack at MOND. And the scientific world had to take it seriously at that point. But that caused some problems, when on August 21st, 2006, NASA made a press release titled, "NASA Finds Direct Proof of Dark Matter." See, this is why I'm a YouTuber, I hid this right here. The information was about the observation of a massive collision between two clusters of galaxies known as the Bullet Cluster. They observed that dark matter had separated from normal matter during the collision. They had this observation by looking at the way light bent around an area of seemingly empty space, with the knowledge that any radiation traveling through space would follow a curved path if it interacts with any matter in the vicinity. So when light bent around seemingly nothing, it was seemingly definitive proof of dark matter. That's how strongly people were looking and trying to find any proof of dark matter, by the way. A bend of light across the galaxy. So we can finally say that we have proof of dark matter, right? So I don't know why I included that other section. Well, no. In the same article, NASA says that this is the strongest evidence yet that most of the matter in the universe is dark. They went on to say essentially that anyone that doesn't believe in dark matter has no ground to sit on, as no one can possibly explain the observed effects of this collision any other way. Meanwhile, the people of MOND had already put out a peer-reviewed paper 2 months earlier, and in my personal opinion, a very funnily titled paper, "Can MOND Take a Bullet?" in a well-respected astronomy journal. The existence of the refraction in the collision didn't contradict MOND at all in their models. In the end, that's what's so hard, and why this deep into the iceberg a lot of these subjects that humans can't comprehend and try to understand end up pretty unsatisfying, with the fact that a theorem, a thought, or even a person hasn't come up with a way of figuring it out yet. Or even if they have, the rest of the scientific community, or even the world, may be against them. All we can hope is that someday we may be able to figure out the truth of dark matter, dark energy, and even figure out more about gravity. Until then, though, we have...
And with that, we've reached the end of the video. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Also, you may realize that this is not Gurdon. I am helping Gurdon with the outro because his head is still hurting from having to explain those last few topics. There will be a part 4. This was decided on by the lovely patrons over on patreon.com. You can also go to putinyoursocialsecurity.com to get to Gurdon's Patreon. Of course, Patreon is never required. It's always appreciated though. But we also appreciate when you leave a like, when you hit that subscribe button, when you leave a comment, or you share the video with a friend. We have been so overwhelmed by the support over on the Patreon that we are not able to read all of the names at this time. It's getting to be a rather long list. This is because the amount of support was so unexpected that we are still in the process of trying to figure out what to make for the tiers, what sort of perks you guys would like to see, as well as just some funny, goofy names for them. So at this time, we're going to read people that are in the tier, quote, a higher tier, and thank you so much for your patience as we figure the rest of this out. So now I'm going to hand it off to my good pal Gurdon, and he is going to read those names.
Want to give a shout out to Keita, Just_DJ, I Love Your SSN, very good username, Quick Naps, Richard Dixon, Mama Katya, Lorian, Papa Scott, Pateau, Triable Trash 18, Katresu, Lil Parsnip, not to be confused with Mr. Stinky, Kofas, Sam Rayater, Sun Golden, Junipi, Walrus FB, and I need to give a very high shout out to these 3 people here that have gone above even the higher tier. I didn't know you could do that, but they have found a way. Chris OP, Anyo Razan, and Daruv Singal. Thank you all again so very much. I would like to give a personal thank you to everybody again that has subscribed, liked, commented on every one of the videos that have come out so far. Last time I put up a part, we were under 10,000, and we just passed 20,000 subscribers, and that to me is just utterly insane, to be honest. The outpouring of everything, the comments, the likes, everything is just wow. Until next time, I've been Gurdon. Goodbye.